Literally thousands of times a week here in the Washington, D.C. area, individual government investigators visit homes to do background investigations on individuals who either work for the U.S. government or do contract work for the U.S. government. Welcome to CITV. I'm your host, David Major. Those background investigations are crucial to maintaining American national security. Now, we're going to look at a three-part segment of CITV in which we listen to Christopher Boyce testify on Capitol Hill. And in it, he makes a comment when he says, "You had no reason to trust me," because what he says is that the background investigations were done so shallow that they really did not know who this man was. And the message for us is that when we have background investigations, it's important to both understand why it's done about us and why we need to cooperate when it's done and we are asked individual questions about people we know. It's a very interesting segment, very powerful. Let's go listen to Christopher Boyce testifying on Capitol Hill.
In early 1975, at the age of 21, I took my first stumbling steps to the KGB. I was a totally naive amateur. I lacked even the most rudimentary skills this subcommittee would associate with espionage. But even today, I am still astounded at how easy the thing was to begin, and given the security system, how near impossible it was to prevent. Regardless of expensive and elaborate security systems, I suggest that espionage arrests are made mainly when beginners make artless, blundering mistakes, and such a policy that gets results primarily by picking up the pieces after a security breach instead of active individual directed prevention is an extremely frail method on which to base security. I think that the counterintelligence elements of government and the personnel security programs of the defense industries are missing the boat. And if you will bear with me, I will try to speak my way through to the root of the weakness as I see it. On April 28, 1977, at the age of 24, I was convicted on 8 counts of violating the espionage statutes and given a sentence of 40 years. My boyhood friend and co-defendant, Andrew Dalton Lee, was convicted in a separate trial on 12 counts of espionage and sentenced to life imprisonment. In mid-1979, I was finally sent to Lompoc Prison, where I was put in the incorrigible unit with hardcore convicts. One day I was reading a book on my bunk, and one of the gangs entered my cell next to me en masse and stabbed my neighbor to death. I remember watching his blood puddle out on the walkway. And not long after that, they did the same thing in exactly the same way to the man in the cell behind me. I heard all of that, the screams, the death gurgle. I was the son and nephew of former FBI agents. I did not expect to live long at Lompoc, and I decided that being shot off the prison fence was a better death than the knives. But I wasn't shot. I got away one night in January 1980. For 18 months, I remained a fugitive despite a manhunt by the U.S. Marshal Service and the FBI. While the government followed leads as far away as Costa Rica, South Africa, and Australia, I spent my days in Idaho and Washington State. It is a frightening life believing that every law officer in the country would be proud to put a bullet in you. I was desperate. I thought returning to prison meant my death. To live on the run, I began holding up federally insured banks. I learned about all that from idle talk in prison. It was terribly wrong, but I never intended to harm anyone, and I didn't. All during this time, I did not hide my true identity and past from dozens of new friends in the Northwest. They were fully aware of what I had done, what had gone on between the Russians and myself, and they knew that I was a fugitive. Finally, I was turned in by a friend wanting to collect a reward, and I was arrested on August 20th, 1981 in Port Angeles, Washington. I pled guilty to everything and now have 68 years instead of 40. The government now keeps me locked in an isolation cell in Marion, Illinois, where I have a lot of time to think about all this in peace. I've been told that the facts underlying the original charges against myself and Dalton are generally known by members of this subcommittee. I don't think I need to recount a long narrative of what we did. Suffice it to say that from March 1979 through December 1976, I removed or photographed a sizable number of classified documents from the highly secret Black Vault, as they called it, of TRW, a CIA contractor in Redondo Beach, California, and sent them on with Dalton to the KGB in Mexico City. I was able to obtain those documents through my position as a specially cleared TRW employee working in the Black Vault, located in Building M4. On more than a dozen occasions, I removed documents from TRW and photographed them. On approximately 6 occasions, probably more, I personally photographed documents while within the vault itself. Dalton, in turn, delivered and sold the documents to KGB agents working out of the embassy in Mexico City. The documents pertained in part to the existence and operation of then highly secret intelligence satellites. As an employee of TRW, I not only received confidential, secret, and top secret and access to special projects, but I was also supposedly restricted by the prescribed physical security measures for classified documents. Obviously, neither the government's clearance procedures nor the company's security procedures worked very well. In fact, the company's security procedures were a great help to me in compromising a CIA project to the Russians. There were some obvious reasons why. Let me begin with the question of clearances. In 1975, when I sent Dalton off with the first classified documents to the Soviets, neither of us was a professional spy, to say the least. We knew as much about espionage as we did about hieroglyphics. On my part, I was not even a professional or a long-standing member of the intelligence community. After dropping out of college, I went to work at TRW in July 1974. My only prior interest in the intelligence community had been one of suspicion and distrust. At 21, in an era of Vietnam, assassinations, Chile, and Richard Nixon's resignation, I had a strong distaste for government. I considered CIA as, if anything, the enemy. When I came to TRW, I had no idea that my work would in any way involve the CIA. I got the job through what one might call the old boy network. My father, a former FBI agent, who then worked in security at another large defense contractor, was a friend of Mr. Regis Carr, also a former FBI agent, and then manager of TRW security for top secret contracts. It was Mr. Carr who hired me. I started at TRW as a general clerk, making approximately $140 per week. I was immediately given what is known as a confidential clearance. Almost immediately, my supervisors submitted my name for a receipt of a secret, then a top secret clearance, then access to 2 special projects, and finally 2 NSA codes. By December, all those clearances had been approved, and I was assigned to the Black Vault, which I subsequently learned to be one of the most secret and classified areas of work at TRW. It was only then that I learned that I would be working on a special project involving the CIA. I was assigned with my immediate supervisor to monitor and process secret communications traffic between the CIA, TRW, and other CIA contacts around the world. My work included daily contact with the intelligence satellite program. In looking back, I remember being surprised that I was given such relatively free access so very quickly to those supposedly highly guarded materials. I used to sit for hours and stare into the satellite guts. It was all science fiction to me. I doubt that I would have gotten the job in the project so quickly, except for my father's friendship with Mr. Carr. Unfortunately, if you accept someone because his father is a friend, it negates the entire security system. I believe that on the day that I was hired, and prior to applying for or receiving any security clearances, the decision to place me in the vault had already been made. On that day, Mr. Carr introduced me to the Director of Security for a special project in Building M4 as the man you will be working for. Later, I learned that this was the Rhyolite Project. Mr. Carr told me that I would be temporarily doing relatively routine and boring documentation work for the first few months until my clearances came through for my permanent assignment. I've been told that in other espionage cases, there are some obvious red flags of potential security violators which went unnoticed in background investigations and by coworkers. Heavy financial indebtedness, sudden affluence, alcoholism, disgruntlement. What was my red flag? Under those indicators, probably none. I was the oldest son in a well-respected, stable, upper-middle-class Catholic family. My father had a fine reputation. While my background investigations were underway, I heard that friends of my parents had been contacted as references. Speaking as adults, they told the investigators that I was the courteous, bright, responsible son of a good family, exactly as they were expected to say. This was the extent of the investigation, as best as I can tell. What the investigators never sought was the Chris Boyce who moved in circles beyond the realm of parents, teachers, and other adult authority figures. To my knowledge, they never interviewed a single friend, a single peer, during the entire background investigations. Had they done so, the investigators would have interviewed a room full of disillusioned long-hairs, counterculture falconers, druggy surfers, several wounded paranoid vets, pot-smoking anti-establishment types, beaded malcontents generally, many of whom were in trouble. In 1974, I believe that the majority of young people of my generation could not be considered politically reliable by CIA standards. I'm sure you remember. Had the investigators asked any of those friends what I thought of the U.S. government, and in particular the CIA, I would never have gotten the job. Had they asked, they would have learned that I'd first begun smoking pot at 16, that I had experimented with a variety of other drugs, along with most everyone else I knew in my age group. Had they asked, they would have learned that one of my closest friends and later partner in espionage was Dalton Lee, whose records on drug charges and probation violations was, by age 22, quite extraordinary. Had Mr. Carr even bothered to question his own sons, my high school classmates, they could have easily told him far more than the government's entire background investigation did. From what I can tell, the government's background investigation uncovered no substantial evidence that the CIA and Chris Boyce lived in separate Americas. They found no past arrest record, no reason to distrust me. I suggest that in an area of supposedly such grave national security considerations, that alone is not enough. The government's background investigation also uncovered no reason to trust me. I was 21 years old. I had attended 3 different colleges, and I had no idea what I would do with myself. I had no substantial work history except school jobs. I laid concrete. I was a waiter. I had a paper route. I was a pizza cook, a janitor, a liquor store delivery boy. I harvested barley one summer. Nothing, certainly nothing akin to the responsibility of handling highly classified spy satellite communications. TRW was my first full-time permanent job. In short, I had never been tested. In my view, that should have generated some caution, especially given the tenor of the times in the early 70s, the widespread questioning of authority and open political dissent within my own generation. Yet, from what I can tell, TRW and the CIA never hesitated in placing me untested and untried in their most sensitive area of employment. I might add that the only thing I was asked to do to get these clearances was to fill out a few forms. Although at the time my little sister was polygraphed before she went to work at a 7-Eleven, I was never polygraphed. I had trouble speaking with the minority councils about polygraphs. Should the government be in the business of making windows into men's minds? Perhaps when a person has a security clearance, it is proper that he give up a part of himself for everybody else. I don't presume to know. To continue, I was never given a subject interview. A year later, after I had already started sending TRW CIA documents to the KGB, I was given access to yet another special project after merely signing a few more forms. No additional background investigations were done to my knowledge. On the question of physical security at TRW's Black Vault, I can answer it simply and quickly. There was none. In my view, and I believe in the eyes of my fellow workers there, security was a joke, certainly nothing to be taken seriously. Take, for example, our project security manager, whom we regularly referred to as our token hippie. On lunch breaks, when not drinking with us or others at the local bars, he would often be skateboarding around the neighborhood. Sometimes he returned the worse for wear with bruises and torn pants. On occasion, he told me he wanted the security atmosphere in M4 to be as unintrusive as that on a college campus. I can recall one incident where he did take an especially active role in security. The M4 coffee fund for employees was found consistently short. The old night janitor was suspected of theft. One evening, the project security manager phoned me in the vault and told me that I was to come upstairs after work to help him catch a thief. We then drilled a hole in an office wall so that he could watch the coffee fund without being seen. For the rest of the evening, the project security manager sat in the dark peering through the hole, eventually catching the janitor pinching a few quarters. When the surveillance began, I went back down to the vault and made myself a drink, wondering at the lunacy of it all. The system could catch a janitor stealing coffee money, but it was incapable of hindering me in any way from passing the entire project to Dalton and on to the KGB. I suppose most people view security regulations as something that should be held in awe by employees. That was clearly not the case at TRW. A number of employees made phony security badges as pranks. My immediate supervisor once made a security badge with a chimpanzee's face on it and, to everyone's amusement, used it to come in and out of the building. The security identification badges themselves were not strictly accounted for. There were boxes of old badges that employees had previously used that were not destroyed for months at a time. These could have been used for improper entry. Prior to coming to the Black Vault, I worked in badges for a while. There was no accountability over the materials used in the manufacturing of identification. I could have made a badge and ID for anyone, giving them access to a number of classified areas. On one occasion in late 1974, before being sent to the Rhyolite project, a special project manager arrived at badge and ID accompanied by an outside consultant. I refused to make badges and identification for the consultant because he was not accompanied by the proper clearance paperwork. The special project manager swore revenge, and she later got it by having me temporarily transferred out of security. Aside from badges, there was almost no supervision over access to the building and the vault. Although my comings and goings at building M4 were logged by the security guards, there was nothing to stop me from entering at any time during the day or night. On occasion, I returned to the vault late at night without being questioned or even raising suspicion. There was simply no questioning on after-hours access as long as one mentioned any plausible excuse in passing, such as, "I forgot my tennis racket." And once inside, there was no monitoring of my after-hour activities in the vault. None of the security guards who would log my entrance or inspect the premises had authorized access to the Black Vault. During some of these after-hour visits, I photographed and removed documents. For a while, I used to come to work at 4 a.m. to process the teletype traffic from Langley and then shut back down and lock up at 5:30 a.m. in order to hunt jackrabbits with my Harris Hawk at sunrise. I would then return to work around 7:30 a.m. and reopen the vault. No one ever questioned this. I could come and go whenever I wanted. I remember laughing about this with a girl I knew who was a bank teller. She used to tell me that Security Pacific would never allow their employees to open and enter their vaults at will, unsupervised, at any time. Controls on access beyond the communications vault area were hardly much better. As part of my courier duties, I made deliveries to the CIA facility. Although I had no clearances or authorization to do so, on occasion I wandered into their code room. Once I recall talking to a female employee inside the vault there. On a clipboard hanging on the wall beside her was a list of the station codes on their circuit. Because I was naturally curious about everything that went on there, I began to note all the handles. She caught me reading it, paused to flip the board over, and just smiled. I do recall that one employee did ask me to leave because I was unauthorized.
Well, as we listen to Christopher Boyce try to explain what he sees as the problem with American security and counterintelligence. First lesson, that they will always criticize security as the cause for their espionage. They made it too easy. I think we have to discount that part of his testimony. However, in his testimony, there are some interesting lessons. The first one, it talks about four things: hiring, background, physical security, and document security. And in it, of all of the testimony that you heard, the most important piece was you did not know Christopher Boyce. You had no reason to trust me. And that's a very powerful piece, because when we do backgrounds investigations, we are trying to determine, can we trust individuals? And this young man appears to come from the right family, the right background. But as he says, if you had known the real Christopher Boyce, if you had talked to my peers, you would have seen that they were all losers. And therefore you could have recognized that that's what I identified with at that time in my life. And I think that says a lot. When we do a background investigation, it is essential for us to find a way to determine whether we can trust this individual. Now, in all of our lives, we get the original background. We also get our reinvestigations. And the reinvestigation is an effort to try to create an understanding of the real person. We know that all of us change as we get older. One of the problems that many people get involved with during the reinvestigation process is the fact that they withhold information. Now, in reality, the vast majority of individuals who go through the reinvestigation process, nothing derogatory is ever developed and nothing ever happens other than they get their clearance and they move on with their lives. The great number of the people who have problems in the reinvestigation is really a product of withholding information as the investigator tries to understand the whole person. And if more individuals were willing to tell everything up front, the security process would move quicker and less people would be put in the trick box as we try to resolve problems in the reinvestigation program. I think that's a very important lesson coming out of this videotape also. Now, as we listen to Christopher Boyce continue his testimony next week in front of Congress in 1985, we hear a different lesson coming from Christopher Boyce. The lesson today is about the difficulty of finding out about the real person so that we can trust them. Investigators have lots of efforts tried to solve that problem. Down here at the Historical Intelligence Collection, there's a number of books that have been written on that particular topic. And one of them, The Gentle Art of Interviewing and Interrogation, a professional manual and guide, is another example of one of the books that you may want to get your hands on to see what an investigator is up against and trying to understand the truth in any investigative process. Now, please come back next week as we continue to look at Christopher Boyce. I'm your host for CITV, David Major.